Robert, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Ace. I'm really glad to be here as well.
So, how big of a problem is intellectual property theft from AI generated works?
This is a really big open question right now. I'm sure you're aware that there is a big lawsuit from the New York Times against OpenAI. There are some other lawsuits pending, all of which claim that the process of training a language model like the ones that are used in ChatGPT involved copyright infringement. I think it's the biggest place where this question of intellectual property theft in AI generated works is coming up. I don't know where those lawsuits are going to come out. I suspect if I had to make a bet, and I could be wrong, that they'll end up settling before there is a judgment. And that the parties, OpenAI and New York Times and other content owners and content creators will come to some sort of business deal that in which, according to which the copyright owners get some compensation for training, and that's going to resolve. This is what's historically happened a few times before, like at the early days of music streaming. There were copyright infringement suits involving MP3.com and Napster and and then the whole issue got resolved through business and licensing deals. I have a feeling that's what's going to happen, and I don't want to say that's going to then make theft moot. It's going to mean though that at least the owners will be able to get compensated.
So,
Yeah.
what is the timeline in your mind for this process? Is it going to be a multi year, possibly multi decade thing? Is it going to be some kind of cultural event where we're all sitting behind the television watching OpenAI get their, behinds handed to them in court? Or is it going to be like at the end of 2024, we're going to have our answer? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just speculating somewhat, again, based on history. I could be completely wrong, but I think within the next year or so,
Hmm.
will see some real significant movement on this because there's so much of a commercial incentive for everybody involved to come to an agreement. The copyright owners, again, I'll use New York Times as an example, but really any large companies that have content or individual creators have a strong incentive to have some certainty about this, and OpenAI doesn't want to have all of this uncertainty about multi-$100 million lawsuits hanging over their heads, and their investors don't either. So I think it's going to happen. At least the broad brush will happen fairly soon. Look, there was already some this came into play in the Hollywood strikes, where ownership over likenesses of actors and use of AI in writing scripts was already part of what was an issue, and got partially at least resolved in the resolutions to those strikes.
So, what happens to the reputation of OpenAI and subsequently big tech? Are we going to still look at ChatGPT and Bard and Llama in the same way? Or are we going to be using them in more hesitant ways? What are your thoughts on the reputations of these technologies?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure. Well, I think when it comes to the copyright issues and what we're referring to as theft, I think once those get settled commercially, it'll give them a little bit more degree of respectability.
Hmm.
I'm not sure that it's going to change so much how most people are using those tools. I think it will change the willingness of corporations to make use of something like ChatGPT to produce their own written works, to produce their own artwork, and so forth. I know that it will give law firms, which I'm familiar with, a lot more comfort in using that kind of technology to produce documents that they might publish. So it will give some more comfort, I think, once those legal issues are resolved. But until now, I know Microsoft, OpenAI, some other companies have already issued these statements to their customers that if you as a customer use one of these tools to generate a piece of art and someone sues you for copyright infringement, the Microsoft or OpenAI will come and indemnify you, meaning cover your legal fees. So right, they're already proactively or preemptively trying to give this comfort to customers to say you should feel comfortable using these tools to create things.
This is the perfect layup to the next question. So, who owns what AI invents, and can these works be patented?
Yeah, I mean, there's two types of works. There's the works that would be covered by copyright, which would be text, images, videos. I mean, there's so much going on with video right now. It's getting better all the time. So far, the courts in the U.S. and in other countries have been a little bit inconsistent on the copyright issue. Um, it does seem like if there is some human involvement, at the very least, that you can get copyright protection for things that you create using AI. So, if you do some touch up to the work that comes out, or you do something creative on the front end, then you, as a human, can get copyright protection. I'm much more closely involved with patents. I find, I'm more interested in that. If you use some kind of AI-based tool to generate a design for an airplane wing, or to write code or something else that can be patented. The question is, uh, can that be patented? And in general, the answer is yes, as long as what you as a human put in was itself invented, then
Hmm.
what comes out the other end can be patented. Uh, in For the most part, if what you put in wasn't inventive, then what comes out, again, the code or design for a physical product, is probably going to be treated as non-patentable because it's what the law considers to be obvious, meaning something that anyone was capable of creating easily using just off-the-shelf AI
Hmm.
without putting any ingenuity into the process, probably not going to be patentable. But otherwise, something that's generated with the assistance of AI can still be patentable.
So, we're gonna have to unpack what inventive means. That feels a little ambiguous.
Yeah, and in fact, in the law, the term that we would use to capture most of what we mean colloquially by inventive, the term we use is non-obvious, which is a very
Mhm.
difficult concept to
Right.
define. What it means is that let's say that you're inventing a new kind of a chair,
Mhm.
right? And you know that existing chairs are made out of pine wood and oak wood, uh, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to use some other kind of wood," but otherwise use the same design as existing chairs that everyone knows about. Generally, just substituting a new kind of material is not going to make your chair patentable unless it conveys some unusual or unexpected property on the chair that you wouldn't have thought of just by a means of substituting in a new material. I remember when I was first learning how to be a patent lawyer, the professor gave an example of a purple television. Okay, that might be new. Maybe no one's made a purple television before, but it doesn't change how the television operates or enable it to do anything new or useful in a different way. So merely coming up with some change to an existing technology doesn't make it patentable. You have to contribute something that is unusual or unexpected in a way that conveys some beneficial results on your invention. But
I
how do you draw the line between those kinds of trivial,
Right.
non-patentable changes and the what you said were inventive or we call non-obvious
Hmm.
changes? Well, the law uses a somewhat circular definition, which is an improvement to an old invention
Hmm.
is non-obvious if that change would not have been obvious to a person of what we call ordinary skill in that field. It's a way of
Okay.
saying that if substituting one type of wood for another or changing the size of something is the kind of thing that people in that field of, let's say, chair design, they all know how to make those types of substitutions. Then that kind of change won't make a new chair patentable. But if you do something unusual, put the legs of the chair in some unusual configuration that makes the chair more stable
Mhm.
in a way that the typical chair designer would never have thought of, that could make your chair patentable. So that is what's considered a non-obvious change because it required more than ordinary skill to come up with. And that's quite, it can be quite challenging to apply that in the
Mhm.
context of AI. One way you may think of it, let's say for generative AI,
Yep.
is that maybe if you came up with a not obvious or unusual prompt that produced a new and useful output, that might be enough to make the result not obvious and therefore patentable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just to clarify, 'cause my next question was going to be, can I use artificial intelligence like ChatGPT and such to create that non-obvious invention and then build off of that? Um, Also, how do you patent an idea? That's one of those things where I'm a little confused by because Uber was a non-obvious thing. The guys were at the Paris airport, I'm pretty sure, and they were just like, this is not working out. Let's go fix this, taxi industry and made it, I don't know how much they're worth, but it's a lot. So is this something that can be patented from artificial intelligence, or is it a little loose? You're smiling, so
Yeah.
I feel like there's going to be a juicy answer here.
Well, because the law excludes ideas, but you can patent either a machine or a process.
Hmm.
And sometimes processes that are defined fairly abstractly can start to bleed over into what you'd consider to be an idea.
Right.
And patent law attempts to distinguish between what it calls abstract ideas that are not patentable and practical applications of abstract ideas, which are patentable. And there has been endless debate that has never been resolved about where to and how to draw the line. So I'll give a simple example. A law of nature, F equals ma, is a law of nature, not patentable. It's considered an abstract idea. But a car engine that makes use of that law of nature, F equals ma, would be patentable. And really, any machine makes use of the laws of physics. So those are easy examples. A mousetrap makes use of the laws of physics. It's an application of an abstract idea, but the abstract idea of the law of nature is, or some equation that describes how the spring moves in a mousetrap, not patentable. But again, when it comes to something like an algorithm in a piece of software, uh, where do you draw the line? Generally, the line has been drawn between what you said. That, let's say, take Uber. The idea of enabling riders to get matched up with drivers would be considered to be too abstract. But a specific algorithm that's new and useful and different from previous matching algorithms that could match riders with drivers more efficiently than a previous algorithm, that could be patented. It's not the idea, it's the
Mhm.
specific sequence of steps that can be implemented in software that would be patented as a process.
See, one of the biggest problems in this space of, intellectual property theft is, these alarm bells are being raised by creators and artists because these AI systems are being generated on their works. So I guess the first question in the series of questions that I'm about to ask is AI replacing creators and artists outright?
I don't think so. I think that it might, it very likely will um,
It will.
dec- decrease the demand. It very likely will decrease the demand
Hmm.
for humans to engage in routine types of creative activity, art,
Hmm.
and writing. Kind of one of the things that's been shown already, not surprisingly, is that ChatGPT can enable just about anybody to become as good as an average human writer.
Mhm.
So if you want to churn out websites or blog posts that are just average, just about anyone can do that. That's quite amazing. So you could say if you previously were earning a living as an average writer, you have a lot to be concerned about because
Mhm.
you can easily be replaced by someone with not much writing skill, if any writing skill at all, who's got ChatGPT at their fingertips. But what it is, the two things that are not being replaced are people with more than average skill,
Mhm.
and even more so, people who can now learn how to use both their existing uh, skill at writing or creating artwork, that
Mhm.
old manual skill, and specific skill at making really effective, efficient use of generative AI and mix those two things together. Uh, that's going to be super valuable. That's what's going to enable people to stay in demand and valuable even in the face of AI. When people learn how to leverage AI to make themselves more effective and efficient and productive as creatives, that's how people are going to succeed. Uh, I just reposted something on LinkedIn. There was someone who's a graphic designer who posted. He said he's created like 75,000 images using Midjourney over the last year. And he's
Okay.
done an incredible amount of experimentation with terms to use in prompts for Midjourney. And he posted his top like 100 or so of these phrases that he mixes together within prompts. And he posted some of the images he's created. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I looked at those images and I said, you know what? I don't think I could create images that good using Midjourney. He's really onto something. This is someone who has a great eye as a graphic designer. I would bet you he has some old-fashioned artistic skill, you know, with a paintbrush, and he's learned through a lot of hard work what works really well with Midjourney. And he's combined all of this stuff together. And I would bet if you add on top of that some skill with Photoshop and other tools, you're going to create amazing, fantastic art that the average person won't be able to create just using average skill plus Midjourney alone. So I think that's the direction things are going to have to go in for people who want to continue to not just have fun, but make a living as creators.
See, Robert, but the example you gave already has many problems. So we just talked about, so just for example, I'm a junior sports journalist, for example, and I've been working at my company for a year, but now with ChatGPT, they don't really need my, templates. They can just, generate it, right? So I'm already out of a job. But if I use ChatGPT and other writing systems, other AI writing systems, then maybe I can upskill and combine my skills. So I have the human creativity and the the LLM creativity, and those together produce what's called HRC, or human robot collaboration, whatever. But if everyone does that, if every junior sports journalist starts incorporating LLMs into their routines, then doesn't that saturate the market anyway? Like, aren't we back to square one if every junior sports journalist is also using these technologies in the same way? So, like, doesn't like doesn't it always flow to the top where the 1% of creators that were using the technologies first or in the best way win automatically, and everyone else, even though they're using the technologies, simply don't get their fair share of the job market or the creator
It's
market?
really hard to know in advance for many reasons. One of them is that we don't the demand is not necessarily fixed. The demand for creative work can be quite elastic. I mean, I think I'm of an age that when I was young, there was three major television networks, and maybe in any given location, you had like 7 television channels. So how many hours of programming was there at any time you could watch? Not many.
Mhm.
And you might have said back then, how much television like content could there possibly be to make available that there would be a commercial demand for? Oh, let's double what there is. I mean, what do we have now? Thousands of times, I would guess, more content through not, cable, streaming services, internet, YouTube. I mean, the I challenge anyone to go back and think that anyone at that time would have said the demand for that creative output would have been that expansive and elastic. And yet it has been. So, I think sometimes the concerns about whether the market will get saturated or whether there'll be enough need for people is based on the assumption that the demand is fixed or not as expansive as it might be. Now, I don't know whether it's going. I really don't know. But all I'm saying is, there was a famous statement back in maybe the 80s when PCs had 640K of memory. So for people now, usually you've got what, 20 gigabytes of memory? And Bill Gates famously said, I don't know why anyone would ever need more than 640K of memory.
Yeah.
And so what does your iPhone now have? Like 1,000 times more memory than that, and everyone still wants an iPhone with more memory on it. So it's a common occurrence for us to have this fixed demand mindset. We don't know what new demand is going to open up for sort of custom services.
Mhm.
Or look, what I do as a lawyer is I essentially, you could say, create content for individual clients, right, who pay me to create a patent application. Now, it's not just for their reading pleasure, it's because that patent creates legal rights for them that are valuable.
Mhm.
But who knows what kind of opportunities AI will create for creatives to create content for small audiences, maybe, who will be willing and able to pay for them. I don't know what direction this is going to go in, but let's just not make the assumption that only the existing business models and sort of markets for creators and consumers are what we're going to be limited to in the future. We just don't know what direction this is going.
Sure. My immediate takeaway is that you're a glass half full, I'm a glass half empty type of. That's the conversation. So let's turn it to you. How is ChatGPT impacting your line of work?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. First, I do a lot of writing about AI, and I do a lot of writing about the law and for marketing for my law firm, for just educating people about patent law and about AI and software related patents. ChatGPT and other AI based writing tools have helped me to produce a lot of that content uh, more easily, more quickly, and I would actually even say at better quality. And I say that because sometimes people, again, in this fixed mindset, only view these tools as ways to enable you to do the same thing in less time, which is one way you could choose to use it, right? You could use to get the same output in less time or worse quality output than you could have produced manually in less time. And we're seeing a lot of that now, right? As I said, there's tons of websites and blogs now that are just being churned out by AI with virtually no human thought or effort going into them. And it's low quality garbage, basically.
Yeah.
But people are using it to get a lot of clicks and serve ads and all that stuff. But you can, if you use it wisely, uh, I found, actually produce better quality in less time. I use it to help me brainstorm a lot on the macro and the micro level, meaning macro level brainstorm just for big ideas. Oh, I've got some general idea of what I want to talk about. What are some angles I could approach this from?
Mhm.
That's big level. And I do it at the section level, at the paragraph level, sometimes even at the sentence level. I'm stuck. So, I'm stuck at writing a sentence. I give a sentence, I give the whole paragraph to ChatGPT, and I say, give me some alternatives to this final sentence, and I'll try to give it some guidance for what is it I want to improve about
Right.
that sentence. So, I really see it as not even just as a system, it's a collaborator, which
Yeah.
I'm using to bounce ideas off of, get ideas from, help me revise things. And I've just found to be an incredibly powerful tool. I'll just give, like, there's so many specific examples I can give. But one of them is anyone who's creative knows you come up with ideas. And I used to for years before I had a smartphone, I always had a pen and a pad of paper because I never wanted to come up with an idea and not be able to jot it down. Right now, for a long time, I used my smartphone for that. I might make a little voice memo of an idea. But what happens with that? You record something for 20 seconds, and then if you don't get to it until a month later, you listen to or read your own note and say, "What was I thinking? Why would I think that was so valuable?"
Yep.
So sometimes now, if I have 5 minutes, I'll sit down with ChatGPT. I'll give it the basic idea. I'll go back and forth with it. And I'll come up with a few pages worth of what are still very rough notes, but it's much better for me to work from those when I come back to that idea a week or two later, because in the moment when I had the idea, I was able to use this tool to help me flesh out something that then becomes the starting point for when I return to it. So there's all, one reason I'm glad we're getting the opportunity to talk about this is so many people talk about ChatGPT in this very simplistic way, which is give it a prompt and have it write something and then publish that thing. Well, yeah, I mean, you can use it that way. But if you what you want is two things: retain your own voice
Mhm.
and produce things that are of high quality. Then you really need to learn to use it as an interactive, collaborative tool in which you're making wise, judicious choices about when, where, and how to leverage it.
I mean, this is a prime example of, the top, just to use a loose word, but worker in the space utilizing this type of technology. Because I do think that most people, especially most students, are just putting in a prompt, getting the essay from ChatGPT or Bard, and then submitting that and probably not being caught. But I feel like it is a little taboo to, you know, I guess, interact and go back and forth with an LLM until you're satisfied. Um, what just initially, why do you think that is? Why are we so, fast paced with our interactions with LLMs?
Well, I thought you were going to, let me make sure I understand the question. You said there was something taboo about going back and forth. Are you saying in the academic context?
Just in general. I mean, this is one of the first times I've heard people, really outline how to interact with a chatbot. Just like going back and forth with ideas. Again, from
Yeah.
my experience, most people are just you put your prompt, you get the output, and that's the entire interaction.
Well, I think the way that ChatGPT is presented, that is the most immediate, apparent way to use it. That's
Mhm.
that's the first reason why I think most people use it that way. Um, and I think the chatbot interface also lends itself more easily to putting a prompt in and then getting something out because it doesn't let you directly edit. I am starting to see more tools out there now that combine an LLM with some kind of an editor, which I
Mhm.
think, I don't know how long it's going to take. Personally, as a writer, that's much more appealing to me than a chatbot interface. And I think we're going to see fairly soon more of that happening. There's a bunch of these writing apps out there. Jasper was a big one, but I don't know how much trouble they're in now as ChatGPT keeps expanding. But tools like that, one of their despite their difficulty in making the case for why you should pay anything for them when you have ChatGPT available. One of their benefits is you can put a prompt in, you get a blog article out, and then it opens in an editor, and you can do things like select a sentence and then apply a command of some kind to it, like expand this or summarize it or change the tone. That kind of interactivity within the editor is something that facilitates interaction much more than a chatbot in which you just have a prompt and then some text that comes out that you can't directly interact. So what do you have to do? What I end up doing is I've got Google Docs or Microsoft Word or something else open in a separate window, and I'm cutting and pasting stuff from ChatGPT into this other thing, and then going back and forth. It's a very clunky way of doing it. And I think we're going to see the next generation going beyond that clunkiness to integrating the editing abilities into the LLM ability so that you can get the best of both worlds, and then people will do it more. That's a long way of answering why I think people haven't been doing it, because the chatbot interface doesn't really lend itself to interactivity.
So on this topic of using chatbots to interact with writing in maybe a more intimate way, let's just say that, should students be using um, chatbots at all? Are you of the mind that students should learn how to write and then, like, learn the rules first and then break them, but don't learn how to
Yeah.
break the rules first? Is it something like that? Or do you think that we just have to fundamentally change the way that we provide education, how we teach students to interact with technology?
Now, I think in general in education, it's always a good idea, regardless of what you're learning, to learn the basics from the ground up before you learn more sophisticated tools. So, I play piano, and I remember when I learned hitting with one finger, right? And then multiple fingers, and then hands separately, and then hands together, and then learned chords, and then learned theory. I mean, you build from the ground up.
Yep.
And I think that's generally a good approach. And if you were going to be writing as well, I always think it's a good idea to learn to start as a reader, right?
Yes.
And then writing, characters, words, sentences, build your way up. I do have a concern that if people were to start from a young age, skipping over that to learning how to write, so to speak, first with a chatbot, they would be missing out on a lot of what they get. And that I actually think that even just from a practical point of view, if you can still go through those stages of learning from the fundamental skills and build on them, and then learn how to use an LLM based tool to supplement and integrate with those kinds of skills, that's probably the best way to go. But there are arguments to the contrary. I
Mhm.
mean, right, for the last 20 years or so, I think there's been a lot of people who've become graphic designers who aren't artists who can paint or draw by hand necessarily. In a sense, they've leapfrogged over those more low level, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, fundamental artistic skills, and they've leapfrogged over to use things, like uh,
Interesting.
Photoshop and Illustrator, where their skill is focused more on composing images or selecting pre-existing elements and combining together instead of creating everything from scratch.
Mhm.
And so, it's a tough thing. I mean, this is partially a question, I think, for developmental psychologists, which I'm not one of,
Let
about
me
whether we're going to be doing a disservice to young people if we
Yep.
don't continue to teach them those fundamental skills first.
Let me push back a little bit on that because I see one glaring caveat, which is that, if I learn how to paint, it doesn't automatically make me a good drawer, and vice versa. But you're saying that if you learn how to, you know, get really good at graphic design, you don't really need to know how to draw or how to paint, even though there's some core components that translate over. It's like you don't need those physical fundamentals to be creative in the digital space.
Right.
However, I would push back and say that you can write with a pen and pencil in the same way you write with or on a laptop. Like that act of writing doesn't change regardless of the medium or whether it's physical or digital. I don't know. I just do you agree with that sentiment or do you have more
I see.
pushback?
I agree. I mean, that's why I say, although I primarily suspect it would be best for people from a young age to still learn the
Mhm.
fundamental skills from the ground up. I can't really prove that,
Sure.
and
Sure.
I can see the other side of it as well. I mean, it's the same thing in music, right? Ever since digital tools became, even before that, right? There's people who have that skill of composing primarily from sampling, and certainly in the early days of that, in the early 80s, from what I remember, there was a lot of criticism of it. People said, look, if you're creating music by sampling, you're not a composer, you're
Mhm.
not a musician, right? And then the counter was, no, look, we're creating music, we're just building from larger building blocks, you know and so I think there's a case to be made on both sides. I just would hope we wouldn't lose that that fundamental ability, and that I think there will always be a place, at the very least, for people who have all the skills from the ground up.
I know you just said you're not a developmental psychologist, but just in case you have further thoughts, what are the effects of ChatGPT-like technologies on younger generations?
Well, one concern that I have about ChatGPT, like I have about lots of other digital technology, is that it can, including like Google. Was the same concern people had about Google when it first started, that it would lead people to fall asleep at the wheel. By which I mean, just those days, or in the 90s, it was, oh, if you could just put in a search query to Google and get a document out, and then cut and paste from that and put it into a paper that you turn in at school, that's an example of falling asleep at the wheel.
Mhm.
You're not putting in the cognitive effort required to really dive deep into the topic, understand it yourself in the same way that you would have if you had to really read multiple sources in depth and then craft an essay word by word on your own, in your own words, that expressed your understanding of what you had gathered and synthesized from all of these sources. And I certainly have the same concern with ChatGPT, that you can put in a prompt and get something well formed out. And if the task that you've been assigned is to write an essay and what comes out looks pretty good, that you'll be tempted to just hand that over. And not only will you, it's not just that you're violating the rules if you're at school,
Yeah.
it's that you won't get the benefit of learning
Mhm.
from that. But so many technologies are like that. I mean, I'll use an example that people might not think of as being analogous, which is GPS.
Mhm.
I love GPS because I have no sense of direction. And, you know, before GPS came around, people your generation may not be old enough to remember before
Yeah,
there was no GPS.
definitely not.
But it really limited where I was open to trying to draw, because I'd be concerned that, one, I didn't want a map next to me if I was on my own, that I'd get lost, and I wouldn't be as adventurous and get going to new places. But ever since GPS, it's expanded my horizons. If I have some new place to go to, someone invites me somewhere, I think of going somewhere, I have no hesitance anymore because I have confidence that the GPS will get me. It's a great benefit of the GPS. But, I realized a number of years ago that there were some places I went to that I had driven to 20 times, 30 times, 40 times using the GPS. And if you took the GPS away from me, I would not be able to get there. Why?
Mhm.
Because I was not paying attention to the road or to my environment while I was driving. All I was doing was, again, falling, almost literally in this case, falling asleep at the wheel, ceding my responsibility to the technology to just let it do all the work for me. So, what I started doing, I still don't do it all the time, but I try to do when I'm going to a new place with a GPS is both follow its instructions and pay attention to the surroundings.
Yeah.
I try to focus on learning the route so that if I had to over time, eventually I could get from one place to another without the GPS. That takes some conscious effort and intention to use the tool both for the benefit that it gives you, the automation benefit, uh, and to help you learn and grow. If you don't set your intention to do that, it's probably not going to just happen on its own. Right? You could put 1,000 prompts into ChatGPT, get 1,000 essays out, and never learn anything from what you've created.
Yeah.
But if when it creates something, you read what comes out, and maybe then you ask it questions to aid in your understanding, and then you go to some other sources and you talk to people and you do a bunch of things and not just blindly accept what it takes, then you could actually both get the benefit of the automation and learn and improve yourself. But all that takes an effort to decide to do it and then to actually engage in doing that over time.
So you just answered my next question, which is how should Gen Z use AI in a safe, inclusive, and fair way? Do you have any more thoughts on this? Because it's a really important, and I understand it's a broad theme and thing to talk about because we have to define safe, inclusive, and fair. We have to define Gen Z. We have to define artificial intelligence. We have to define use. Um, but just if we're using the loose definitions of all of those things, how should they?
I would say, in the examples I just gave, are good specific examples of the general principle
Mhm,
of keeping your mind open and
mhm.
pay attention and be conscious while you're using the technology. You know, this is again, I use falling asleep at the wheel or just if you just lay back and let it do its thing and just take its output uh, unconsciously, you may be able to get some results out of it that will be satisfactory in school or at a job or in some other context, but you won't really benefit or learn or grow from.
Yep.
So, and you mentioned bias or inclusivity. It's the same thing, right? If you put a prompt into Dolly and get an image out, and you look at it and just take it, image generators are a really good example that have been shown to be quite biased based on their training data. But if you are conscious about what you want to portray in an image, it may influence what kind of prompt you put in, and it may help you to remember to pause when the image comes out and look at it and say, okay, does this really reflect what I want in terms of not just the content conveying what you want, but in terms of bias or inclusivity or anything else. And if it doesn't, you could either manually revise that output or go back and ask it to come up with something different. But that all requires that you pay attention. That's why I say being conscious, just another way of saying pay attention. Uh, and there's so many other examples of that. Learning prompt engineering and techniques for creative. That's another example where you engage in the learning separately and then you apply it when you're using the technology. But I'm not faulting anyone for falling asleep at the wheel because when you have technology that's this powerful, it is so tempting to just give it something easy and let it do the work.
Yeah.
You know,
You, you,
it's so tempting. In the past, when we had less powerful technology, you didn't have the option of doing it. because the technology wasn't powerful enough to produce an output that on its own could be used as a, for an essay that you could publish. So you just, by that very fact, had to have skill and had to put in order to get something that was publishable. Now that you have the option of not putting in effort, it's so easy to just not put the effort in, take the path of least resistance, which is why you have to pause and stop yourself, and why organizations are now, doing their best, whether it be a school or workplace or something else, putting in policies. I tend to prefer policies that are more uh, uh, encouraging rather than prohibitions. The prohibitions like don't use generative AI, but instead policies that teach people how to make productive, healthy, inclusive, fair use of AI. But those kinds of policies and training and guidance, those are all very helpful, because one of the reasons for that, it's very hard for any individual person, to learn best practices all on their own.
Right.
So that's going to be a big part of it. Schools will have to play a role. I mean, most of what I've seen from schools so far is very defensive. What I mean by that is just trying to maintain the status quo and telling students they can't use the technology. That's only going to last for so long. There definitely are schools and educators that are taking a more proactive stance and saying, not only can't we stem this tide, but we shouldn't. Let's take the lead in helping students and educators learn how to make positive use of this, like we've made positive use of all the previous generations.
You speak in such a clear and detailed manner on this topic. How did you get into this space?
I mean, I feel like this has been something I've been passionate about since the very first time I ever used a computer, which is about 40 years ago.
Wow.
I've often told this story. I was in public school in Brooklyn, New York, early 80s, and never seen a computer before. And our school got two TRS-80s. Those were black and white computers that had a floppy disk, and they got wheeled around from class to class because there were just two of them in the whole school. I don't know, we probably had 1,000 students, as a city school at the time. And I remember, our teacher, I was in 5th grade, she must have been given a book on how to program in BASIC, because she'd never programmed in BASIC before. And I remember we went back to the back of the room and she said, okay, type this in. And the first program I learned how to write was line 10, print, my name is Robert. And I hit enter, and then it said, my name is Robert. And somehow that blew my mind. I feel like looking back, that's what hooked me on computers. The fact that you could somehow type words into a machine and command it to do something that it would then do. And so I suspect a lot of people had that aha moment when they used ChatGPT for the first time. Way, way more powerful version of that experience. But to me, it's fundamentally the same thing. The experience of expressing a desire for something in words and putting that into a machine, and then having the machine, I'm going to put in quotes, understand what you're saying
Thank you
and
for putting that in
respond to you.
quotes. Yeah.
And respond to you in a way that at least feels like understanding.
Right.
Either by writing something or taking an action or explaining something to you. It's a really incredible experience. And so that's what motivated me. And so I've been fascinated with that aspect of human computer interaction, we call it, ever since. How, as a person, can I express myself to this machine in a way that it can understand? And how can I expand my own ability to be creative and expressive, and in the case of computers, also get productive work done in the world, all of those things. So, this has been something I've been working on and integrating into my life and thinking and writing about working with clients on for decades.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Robert, this has been such a great conversation. Just one last question for you. What advice do you have in life and career for Gen Z?
I think Gen Z is in an incredibly good position to take advantage of all of the skills they have at using technology and the fact that everyone in Gen Z has grown up with it and has such a facility with technology and ease with it, lack of fear of it. Uh, and so uh, I would encourage Gen Z, people in Gen Z, to marry that with the pre-technology skills of learning how to express yourself in words, how to understand people and human needs, and how to put all that together in all the ways we've talked about. I think Gen Z is in a great position to take advantage of all of this because of where you sit on the border of the technology world and everything that's about to come.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Robert, this has been a great conversation, very informative. Definitely one I'm going to rewatch because you said a lot of things that I have to think over and unpack more. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, yeah. On this topic of how to make use of AI to be more creative and productive, go to my website at robertplotkin.com.
Mhm.
It's pretty new, but I've been posting pretty regularly on all the kinds of stuff we're talking about. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Robert Plotkin. The third hat I wear is as a patent attorney. So if you're working on anything innovative, new type of software or technology product, you can go to blueshiftip.com. That's my law firm website. And we have tons of free resources there for innovators, founders, programmers, engineers. If you want to learn about intellectual property law and how it might apply to you, you can check that all out at blueshift.ip.
Great. And we'll put all of these links in the show notes. Robert, thank you for the work you do, and thank you for this conversation.
Thanks, Ayush. Thanks so much for having me.